So let's start building our game community, and let's take a look at the tools and methods for gathering your players into one place so that you can manage them as a community. Community management for games isn't something that's new. In fact, it's something that games developers have been doing for decades, stretching back from the primitive days of game community management, where game developers use text-based discussion forums and bulletin boards to manage their player base, all the way through the age of social media platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Discord, and Twitter. But one major challenge for games developers using these external tools to build their game communities is what we call the community participation rate, or the percentage of players joining your game community divided by the total number of players in your game. For a typical mobile game, the average community participation rate ranges between 1 to 2%. Even for the top game community management teams that are building their game communities on top of social media platforms, the most that they're likely to get is anywhere between 5 to 10% sometimes, and that's considered world-class. To overcome this challenge of low participation rates in external game community management platforms like web-based discussion forums, as well as social media platforms, new tools and methodologies are emerging which enable a concept that we call integrated community management, or bringing the community into your game rather than driving players outside of your game to an external community. Integrated community management tools for mobile games are so effective, in fact, that the participation rates for well-run integrated community events can reach upwards of 80+% versus the 5 to 10% for world-class events run on external social media platforms. And if the end goal of our first step of community management is to gather 100% of our game's players into the community, then integrated community management makes a lot of sense, because the one place where all of your players are already there is inside of your game. Now that we know how to solve the community participation rate problem and have gathered a large percent of our players into the community, let's talk about the second step: interacting with the community in meaningful and scalable ways. One of the biggest challenges of game community interaction management is that mobile games can have millions or tens of millions of players. And if you can effectively drive community participation rate to 80%, you could be managing thousands or even tens of thousands of interactions with the community in your game every day. So how do we manage the sheer volume of game community interactions without completely overwhelming our community management team? Throughout the years, we've helped manage the integrated community interactions for dozens of developers in hundreds of games for tens of millions of players worldwide. And based on this experience, we've distilled 3 rules for meaningful and scalable community interactions management. Firstly, you need to design thoughtful and well-planned community interaction events that have a limited number of player interaction options. For example, if you'd like to get feedback from your player community on what future content they would like to see in your game, rather than throwing out an open-ended question, it's almost always better to design a few thoughtful options and then ask your player community to vote and interact on these sets of options that you've presented. Secondly, you want to automate as much as possible the grunt work involved in managing community interactions. Look for integrated community management platforms that provide simple yet effective automation options like keyword filters, quarantine options, video and image recognition. This will allow your community management team to offload the labor-intensive task of reviewing and sorting through thousands of player posts, and rather spend their time focused on designing meaningful and thoughtful events. Last but not least, work to identify key contributors within your game community that can help create great content, moderate other players, or even run events on behalf of your community management team. By following these 3 rules for managing a scalable and meaningful set of player interactions inside your game community, you will now be ready to move on to the final and most important step of community management: influencing community behavior through live ops events that have a measurable impact on your game as a business.